So I just wanted to welcome everybody to this afternoon's Ask a Light live webinar held in conjunction with Turnitin. We have with us today Phil Dawson from Deakin University and Ann Rogerson from the University of Wollongong and Chuck Woody-Ogo from Turnitin to talk about e-cheating. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck to get us started. So Chuck, over to you.
Perfect. Just checking everyone can hear and see me. Oh, good. Perfect. So good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, or even good evening if you're joining us from another part of the world. My name is Chukudi, and I am the Assessment Solutions Consultant for Turnitin. And part of our collaboration with Ask a Light is seeing how we can leverage the experts in our industry, especially the assessment space and academic integrity, to create that learning space for academics or the education community to actually have conversations and learn from people who have been doing research in this space. I'm very, very, very pleased, delighted, and very grateful to be presenting Professor Phil Dawson of Deakin University and Dr. Ann Rogerson of the University of Wollongong, who will be talking about e-cheating and assessment security. The goal here is to explore best practices for upholding academic integrity in a digital world. I would very much like to acknowledge the elders of the land for which I'm currently sitting and on which Turnitin is based, the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, and emerging, and thank them for an opportunity to be here. As we begin today's session, feel free to post your questions in the chat. We've got some very able moderators who will be putting those questions together, and hopefully at the end of the presentation, we'll respond to the questions. With further ado, I would like to hand over to Phil and Anne, and hope everyone has a really, really great learning experience today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Chakwadi. Really happy to be here. I'm going to click on, and it all works. It's always the joy when it does. So I'm Phil. I'm from Deakin. I want to talk with you about e-cheating. Really, I got three things that I want to get across here. Firstly, that e-cheating is different to traditional cheating that we might have thought of. Secondly, around balancing sort of the positive academic integrity mission and the more adversarial assessment security mission, and I'll go into what those are, throughout the e-cheating life cycle. So not just at any one point, but thinking about it from sort of a start to finish and then maybe starting again. And finally, that technology can help, but we really need multiple layers. Always good to have a disclaimer in a presentation so you know where the person's coming from. And I'm a standards-based assessment person. So I'm an assessment researcher. Standards-based means I think it's really important that we set a standard. We might alternatively do like criterion referenced assessment. We need to see what people are capable of against those standards. If you don't think we should assess students, you might not agree with some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. And I support assessment for learning, that's that AFL, and academic integrity. And I think cheating is a symptom of broader societal problems. So if you think it's all because of neoliberalism or class size or students as consumers or something, I'm there with you. But we have a responsibility to do something about cheating that goes beyond the broad, intractable social things. So I'm not in that space. I'm more focused on what can we do as educators, as people at higher education institutions. And I receive research funding from edtech companies, and that includes Turnitin, though I'm not here as a paid presenter or something. I get funding to do research projects. And my mum helped me contract cheat when I was in year 4. I've learned the error of my ways, and no one writes my stuff for me anymore. Okay, on to the first thing, on to e-cheating. So in the book that you might have seen on the first slide that I had, it really focuses on this area of e-cheating. And a really straightforward definition that it's cheating that uses or enabled by digital technology. And you'll see I love the use of tragic sort of hacker stock photos. So there's a great one. Now, e-cheating, what's it include? It includes things like contract cheating, where it's facilitated by technology, the sort of buy essay thing. What I find really concerning about this screenshot is the little bit from EduBirdie there. So we've got, is buying an essay safe? And if you lacked sort of technology literacy, you might think it's Google telling you it is absolutely safe, as you only pay when you receive the paper, etc., etc. If you lack technology literacy, you might think this 5-star rating there for AustralianHelp.com is in some way legitimized or endorsed by Google here. I think there's a real problem with how middle companies like search engines, etc., kind of facilitate this, and these cheating companies get a little bit of credibility through that. So that's sort of contract cheating as part of it. You got, sorry, I'm experiencing that terrible thing where I'm trying to click next slide and nothing's happening. Okay, great. Contract cheating, got the use of specialist cheating technologies. Here we've got a smattering of them. On the left, we've got a company that operates a few kilometres from my place. I'd be allowed to walk there in our current Melbourne lockdown. They sell a cheating calculator online, specifically designed to help you cheat in exams. Yes, I have reported them to TEXA, and it would be really interesting to see if under the new legislation any action is taken. In the middle, we've got Photomath, a technology tool. You take a photo, it's an app, you take a photo of some maths, it gives you solutions. And on the right, we've got a specialist exam cheating earpiece. So this is designed just for cheating in exams. There's no other sort of legitimate use for it that they're promoting. So e-cheating includes these specialist technologies. It includes hacking and cheating in online exams, or in some other way trying to overcome the technologies that are used to promote integrity. And here you'll see a screenshot on the left of someone running an online exam within a virtual machine and being able to get past the proctoring. I think this specific case has been conquered by the proctoring company though. And some uses of study sites. And here we've got, a conversation about is using Chegg cheating and how not to get caught cheating. I'm not going to say that all Chegg is cheating, especially since they're a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company, but there certainly has been a rise in the use of these sites for cheating during the pandemic. A cynical view on that is that they've offered something that universities didn't offer during the pandemic. Now, how is all of this different? And I just encourage anyone who hasn't got their microphone on mute to please put it on mute. I'm getting a little bit of echo. So e-cheating is different because, well, it doesn't require any sort of cleverness or smarts to do. Often when you talk about cheating, there's this response of, oh, if someone's so clever to do that, they deserve to pass anyway, which I don't agree with. Remember, I'm an assessment person. Cleverly cheating is not the same as demonstrating the learning outcomes, no matter how clever you are with your cheating. But e-cheating doesn't even require that. It can be packaged up, shared freely. It can be bought with a credit card. It can be sold. It can be anonymous. We can be very anonymous when we cheat in this way. It is pushed to students by social media and through online ads. You'll find if you go onto Twitter and tweet that you're having trouble with stats or something, you will get approaches from cheating companies to do work for you. You weren't looking for it, but it will come to you. And work of Alexander Amagud in that space is really interesting if you want papers to follow up. It's pushed to students online. It usually rates higher on web searches than legitimate help. Recently, I did a search on Harvard referencing, of all things, and the top results for me with my search experience were contract cheating companies. And it evolves at the pace of technology. So cheating kind of didn't change very quickly for hundreds of years, and now it's changing so rapidly now. Please, I'd encourage everyone to put their mics on mute. And finally, it's never more than a web search away. So in these sorts of ways, cheating now, this e-cheating is different to what we had in the past. So we've got to think differently in how we address it. If you want more on e-cheating, I've given a really quick summary of a free chapter you can get from my book. So you can download this chapter for free off the publisher website through that link. So that's e-cheating's different. Now I want to talk about balancing academic integrity and assessment security throughout the life cycle of e-cheating. When I say academic integrity, I mean the positive, educative, values-based mission. When I say assessment security, I mean more of an adversarial or punitive and evidence-based mission. Evidence in terms of we want proof that it addresses cheating, that stops cheating, that it detects cheating in some way. These two things are in tension, but they're not a dichotomy. We have to do both. Discussions around cheating often get really polarized into either we have to stop cheating and track down those dirty cheaters and surveil the hell out of them and do all of these things because if left alone, students are going to cheat, or oh my gosh, that's such a terrible view. We should just trust students. Trust is the way. And through trust, we will fix the problem of cheating. And that also doesn't work. The trusting approaches, yes, they do reduce cheating. I'm not going to say they don't, but they don't reduce it in a really huge way. So we've got to kind of walk this difficult line between the two views, between the positive view of academic integrity, which is a values-based mission, and these here are good values to develop in students, even if they did nothing to address cheating. These things are good for professional integrity. We want students to graduate with these. Plus, they do help us to address cheating. And the sort of more adversarial view of assessment security, which is about hardening assessment against attempts to cheat, approaches to detect and evidence those attempts to cheat, and measures to make cheating more difficult. So it's sort of a balance, not a dichotomy, between the trusting, educative and proactive, and the detecting, the punitive and the proactive or reactive. And it's sort of the crime prevention and the policing or surveillance. I'd love a utopian society where we don't have the policing and surveillance, we just have the crime prevention, but that's not a feasible next step from where we are right now. Similarly with cheating, it's not. So there are many points in time where we can intervene with cheating. It's not just a moment. It's easy to take a simplistic view of a student cheats in and of this one point in time, but it's a series of events. So let's look into those. And this is sort of the third chapter in that book if you want to follow on. And a lot of libraries have that one. Don't feel you need to get a copy. How can we get in there at different points in time and disrupt it? Here I've got highlighted green some academic integrity approaches and highlighted red some assessment security approaches that we might try at different points in time. So that the first of these is countering the persuasion that's put forward by cheating purveyors with education campaigns. Cheating sites get to our students sometimes before we get to them. Or if not before, they get to our students more often. At universities, we often have a vaccination approach. You do the academic integrity module, and then we leave you alone unless you make a mistake, and then we punish you. That's not enough. We need to do continual support in that space. So it may be through continuing education campaigns. Now, on an assessment security side, here we've got site blocks, and that's an approach that's being used all around the place now. I don't know about you, but at my university, I can't access heaps of websites now because they are branded as cheating websites. So I have to go through another way to get there. That's an example of an assessment security approach to try and harden against contract cheating. On the right, we've got referral to support. I think at the moment, the approach that we have of just blocking sites is not good enough. We need to block the sites and have education at that point. Grab students when they're about to make the mistake, because if I'm faced with a site block and no education, I'm just going to try and get around the site block. But if there's some referral to support or some other education there, I might change my ways rather than just try and get around your block. There I've got deplatforming cheating. I was trying to come up with a good way to say this. You might be familiar with this idea of deplatforming, where we don't let someone use some sort of public platform anymore. So people getting booted off Twitter because they're spouting horrible racist things is an example of deplatforming. I think we should look at deplatforming cheating. I think social media platforms, web hosts, credit card payment processors, advertising platforms all provide a platform for cheating. We need to campaign against that platform that's being provided. And I think deplatforming is going to be more effective than what I've got on the right, which is legislating against it. I just don't think the legal approach seems to work. And if you want a paper where I've looked at the effectiveness of that, you can go onto my Google Scholar. Monitoring the production process, there's examples of watching students as they do their work, such as remote proctoring tools and improving detection rates through training, staffing, and technology. I'm going to go into some of the technology soon, and Anne's also going to go into technology in that space a lot more. And finally, amnesties. I don't think we do this enough. Let's say you've cheated and you're in trouble and you feel bad about it. There's no good way to own up at a lot of universities that doesn't involve the full punishment. And I'd really cite the University of New South Wales as a great example of a place that has some good ways for students who have done contract cheating, for instance, to own up to it and have an educative approach to get around it. They certainly still face sanctions, but they're not as bad as if they got caught out themselves. So you can see here there's a balance between positive educative approaches and sort of more adversarial approaches. We need a mixture of both. Okay, my final thing I want to talk to you about is how technology can help here. I'm going to say some technology that I think can help, and also argue to you that no one technology, no one anything can solve this problem for us. Firstly, text matching. I'm not going to talk about this a lot because in my view, text matching is totally something that we should be using. I think it's easy to make the case that the fall in copy-paste plagiarism is probably attributable to the rise of tools like Turnitin's originality tools. That said, there is more nuance to it beyond just does it work, and I think Anne's going to talk about that a bit. Remote proctored exams, I'm a bit more unsure about these. There's a real balance between some concerns that have very mixed evidence to them around privacy, surveillance, anxiety, distrust, discrimination, and even the continuation of exams, which we may or may not want to do, against evidence that proctoring probably deters cheating and claims that it is or isn't effective at detecting cheating. I think the jury's out still on remote proctored exams, but I understand that for pragmatic reasons, a lot of places are using them. And my view is they probably are appropriate in some circumstances. If you want the more in-depth version of that, I prepared a resource for TEXA, and I've given a talk recently on remote proctored exams in particular. And hopefully someone can remember those links or chuck them on the chat or something. Finally, I think it's important to think beyond the proctoring in the moment and the monitoring to approaches that look at student work. We had Turnitin's originality products, and other text matching probably being responsible for the fall in copy-paste plagiarism. I'm really interested in stylometrics at the moment. So tools like Turnitin authorship. We did a study on an early alpha of Turnitin's authorship product and found that, it can improve detection rates of contract cheating by comparing student work against that same student's previous work. The markers at my university were more accurate at being able to spot work that was contract cheated than if they didn't have access to the tool. I think also it's important, these sorts of tools, for awareness raising. Just the very presence of tools that put into your marking workflow the possibility of contract cheating is a powerful thing. I think people need support with workload of investigating cases and putting them through procedures, and tools in this domain can help with that, and also provide a bit of a macro view of contract cheating at an institution, so beyond just individual cases, to try and understand where sort of hots might be. So I think this is a promising area. But all of that needs to be taken in the context that there's no one solution. On the left here, we've got there's no one solution to the coronavirus pandemic. And we've got many layers of Swiss cheese in this Swiss cheese diagram. A mask is a layer of Swiss cheese against the coronavirus. It'll work pretty good, but it isn't a complete solution. And neither is hand hygiene, and neither is social distancing, but together enough layers, they can do a pretty good job at addressing it. We need a similar approach when we think about cheating. There is no single solution, and if we try and look for one, we will be disappointed, and we might quit because it's all too hard. Here we've got a diagram from Rundle, Curtis and Clare, which is a Swiss cheese diagram for cheating, and I think that's a really great way to think about it. Don't look for the perfect solution, be pragmatic, think about what layers might help us to address the problem most of the time. We'll never get a perfect solution. So I'm going to leave you with this. One thing, e-cheating is different to traditional cheating. It's changing at a faster pace. Our approaches to deal with it need to be different. We need to think about balancing academic integrity and assessment security throughout the e-cheating life cycle. There's not just one moment where we can try and address cheating, like the moment of submission of an assignment. It's a process, not a moment. And we need to target the whole process. And finally, the technology can help, but we shouldn't expect to find the perfect technology. We'll want a bunch of layers, and we'll also want layers that aren't even technology. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over now, and we'll do questions about all of this at the end. So over to you, Anne.
Thanks so much, Phil. And thank you everyone for joining today. It's lovely to see so many people online. And feeling for those who are in lockdown in Melbourne, our thoughts are with you. So I'm actually going to follow on from where Phil has, and Phil talked about that there are multiple layers. So I'm actually going to look at some of those layers and how they come together and how we can use technology, but also insight to detect academic misconduct. I noticed in the chat, and I will touch on this going through, Eric had made a note and said, are we talking about stuff that's only paid? File sharing is just as dangerous as paid work. It operates on barter systems, free systems, and a number of sites operate around the world, thousands in fact, on a barter type arrangement. And so when we refer to contract cheating, we're actually talking to anything where someone has entered into an arrangement where they don't do their own work. So I just use that as a preface. So I look at, to put the caveats on it, like Phil did before the beginning of his, my research has actually grown into detecting and preventing contract cheating. It's evolved through a series of work and actually looking at student assessments. So I have used the technology, but also found some patterns and clues that are evident in particular submissions that have built into a body of work. And some of this is what I'm sharing with you now, and it's also available in some other publications. So I talk about identifying areas of concerns and irregularities. And one of the things I find that in order to detect contract cheating or something that isn't quite right is to understand the norms that are in your particular discipline or that operate around your particular assignment. So I talk about patterns and clues because that's what we normally see, and some of the clues are things that don't sit quite right. Some of the things that can help, Phil touched on assessment. Our design criteria and updates to assessment do influence contract cheating. And other things like hunches, intuition and smells. I would read a piece of paper and there's something not quite right and it makes me want to look a little bit deeper. So in this, technology can help us, in particular Turnitin, but professional academic judgment is critical. And you will develop those skills the more you grade and the more that you have engagement with students, talking about conversations about why they've done it, and that actually help refine your judgment skills. So what do I look for? I teach in the area of organisational behaviour, and I'm currently Associate Dean of Education in a Faculty of Business and Law. And one of the things I teach students in the workplace is about observation. The same thing actually applies to this particular circumstance. So I am looking for what Turnitin is telling me when something has gone through an assignment, or gone through the system. But there can be ranges as to what I'm actually looking at. The biggest area I find and actually detect things is in referencing and citation. I would detect more contract cheating through reference lists than I would through anything else, because that's where the majority of irregularities actually occur. If I have set some assessment criteria, I find that contract cheating sites or students taking material from sharing sites, it does not meet the criteria. And then there's also the irregular observations, or where parts of a submission just don't make sense. I find myself rereading things, and that's a clue as well. So the thing with Turnitin scores are great, but they're not absolute. So we have filter functions where we can eliminate bibliographies, we can eliminate small matches, and it can also help us aid in what addressing or assessing what is really a cause for concern. So you have to be aware of the norms in your disciplines. So if you've asked students to use a particular formula, a particular reference piece, a particular text, it is likely to come up in every assessment task that's submitted. That isn't cheating. That is something that we could normally expect to see. Some scores we get, particularly inflated scores, related to course scholarship, particularly for new or international students. And what I'm finding is great patterns in the transition point. So when people are coming into the institution or swapping between institutions, that we all have our own requirements, and students try to understand that, or we have academics who have their own rules, can cause confusion for students. So therefore, not everything is an academic integrity case. Large matches are obviously a cause for concern, but we have to understand how some of those matches actually come about. Yes, we can have a complete copy either of an assessment, or we can have a complete copy from something that's available on the internet, a Wikipedia page, but it can also occur from using other students' work whole or in part. And this is where the file sharing comes in. So someone might borrow, they might know the student, but they've gone to a file sharing site and actually taken a copy of that material and submitted it, so it will match back. Students who are recycling, self-plagiarising their own assessments from a previous subject, or even a previous attempt at a subject where a student has failed before. If you have group assignments through Turnitin, usually the requirement is that one group member submits the paper. But if multiple members of the team actually submit the assignment, that can cross-match. And then this indirect matching through sharing or purchase. If we match to other students within an institution, what does it actually mean? We might be reusing our own assignment. It might be someone taking it from a previous session, shared work, or here comes in some of the file swapping sites. So sites like Course Hero, ThinkSwap, Baidu Library. There are a number of sites around the world. So some of them are purchase sites, some of them are bartering sites, and this is one of the areas where some of my research fell into. This risk is increased where assessment tasks are not changed from session to session, year to year, or reliant on textbook questions. The moment a textbook is published, the instructor's guide is available on the internet. So if you're relying on that as a question design perspective, you're actually at a greater risk of encouraging or making students less reliant on doing their own work. Text that's too similar to another author's work. This shows an example highlighted from a Turnitin report. And in this case, you can see there's coloured areas, but a few areas that aren't shaded. And in this particular case, students have changed a couple of words to try and make the word look like their own. This is close paraphrasing and is a form of plagiarism. It's particularly evident when students use synonym replacement strategies. So they might go through and pick certain words, select a synonym to try and make it look different. And in these cases, the students, I use Turnitin as an educative approach. So students are allowed to multiple submit. And so talking through some of these issues, students have to go back and rewrite things in their own words. Zeros are also a cause of concern. It can indicate an incomplete submission. I've found cases where students won't put in their referencing, citation list, bibliography because they're concerned about the matches. So I actually talk to students in class and say, bibliographic matches, if they're correct, are actually a good thing because it's pointing to some quality resources. Students can try and falsify things by missing words, only uploading part of the assignment, putting in blind commas, putting in false words, extra spacing. They can falsify references. So some try bibliographic mashups. They put bits and pieces together to make what looks like a reference but isn't. The essay mills that Phil was showing some of the Google searches before, they'll actively go out and say, we will guarantee that your assignment won't match in Turnitin. But they are using falsification pieces at the back of that. I actually like promoting reference list rainbows because it shows a range of resources and not just from one session. So reference list rainbow will actually convert different colours for the various references. And the rainbows, they're not absolute, but they are one way of actually saying to students, hey, you're actually connecting to some resources. And that's why these cases are an indication of some quality references, but it doesn't guarantee that the references are related to the topic. Gaps can mean engineered references or bibliographic mashups. Some references can be misrepresented, and this is something that is particularly evident, or a strategy of essay mills, who'll take references and re-engineer them. And they re-engineer them so it looks legitimate, and if you are scanning it, looks legitimate, but in actual fact it's not. Incorrect referencing formats. So if Turnitin is not matching, it's depending on where that reference has appeared before. I point out to students that Turnitin doesn't do its spell check on them, so that's still a requirement up to the students. Errors can indicate commas, or we'll also get to paraphrasing tools. Felicity Prentice is on this call as well. She's done some work in that area just as I have. I've found students in some areas will use old textbooks because they feel they haven't been digitised. So using those will reduce the chance of matches. However, they're identified by having a lot of old reference materials in them. There's no relationship to current literature, they have elements to current thinking, and they do not align with some or all references in the list. So one of the ways of managing this is actually setting some parameters around what references you will allow within the assignment, because then this establishes a norm. So once people go outside the norm, it's another clue to have a conversation with someone about something not being quite right. This is an example of a bibliographic mashup where a student had actually taken it from a file sharing site. And the reason I picked this one up, okay, from an Australian point of view, there was no Journal of the Economy, and we certainly don't have state-based editions. The conversation with the student didn't realise that the Tribune H was actually the Herald Tribune newspaper, and that bits of references had gone together. So I was able to search and actually find where this came from. But the student actually had no idea that this was not a legitimate resource. A couple of other things that people can use technology for is back translation and paraphrasing tools. I've found that the instances of back translation have actually decreased and paraphrasing tool use has increased. So back translation, because I can put it through a Google Translate, translate it into a third or even fourth language, and then convert it back to English. It tends to come out looking very much like Latin, and the words don't make sense. Paraphrasing tools actually take text and spin them, but they change the words but don't always retain the meaning. One of the experiments I did with Turnitin, these don't, some of the reference material will show up, but some of the text takes on, and I just see someone takes a comment about artificial intelligence takes on another meaning. It certainly does. But what I've found with these paraphrasing tools, and I know Felicity found something similar, is that if someone has poor English language skills, they don't identify that the text does not mean, or the grammar is incorrect. So that can be a clue as to their use. I find differences in English expression, where I had concerns about an assignment and spoken to a student that their level of spoken English is very different. Excuse me, I'm in a light-saving room. Their levels of spoken English are very different to their levels of written English. Poor English does not mean that the student had written it themselves, nor had not written it themselves, but it was a prompt point for a conversation. And this is where assignment setting the criteria really makes a difference. The submissions don't answer the question, or a student can't respond to questions about content. I tend to set assignments that require relations to real-world examples or current issues, and provide recommendations to address that. I find that the purchased assignments are generally bland. They can talk about theory, but they can't really integrate those local examples or recent examples. And here's the comment again about students with poor English skills can't tell what they've bought or traded does not assess assessment criteria. So put the link, and I see David's put it in the chat, which is to the checklist. And that checklist was part of the roadshow that was done to talk about contract cheating, where sessions were run in various states. And I know Felicity had taken some work and put a nod out to her that this is a summary of some checklists, drawing on some of my past research, plus some other work there about how to actually have conversations with people. Word salads, I can tell you some stories about word salads. My favourite was an in-basket exercise became in-wicket with the use of a paraphrasing tool. So my comment on this is there will still be a need to be a level of academic judgment. We can't totally rely on technology. Technology gives us some clues and direction, and terms in reports are really useful, but they require interpretation. We can't just take a number and make a decision. Understanding your discipline or assessment norms helps you to identify the irregularities. So some of it, for example, I talk about if you see a repeat through a number of different submissions, we mightn't actually have clarified the criteria. I might need to refine it in a later session. A particular group of students might have had a similar issue. And we need to be careful that from an educative approach that we don't blame students for issues that are ours. So I'm going to leave it there. And I know, as Phil said, we're around to have some conversations and happy to take some questions. Really enjoy seeing some of the word salads that have been in the chat. They can be quite amusing. And Felicity's one where angles became angels. So that was a particularly interesting one in a nursing context. So I'll throw it back to David and Chuck as moderators, and we're happy to take some questions.
Thanks very much, Anne, and thank you both, Anne and Phil, for the insights on that presentation. We'll open it up for questions now. I do have a couple of questions that came through in the chat. So in the meanwhile, if folks want to ask questions, you can either use the hand raise icon in the bottom center of the screen if you would like to ask your question verbally. Otherwise, feel free to write further questions in the chat. The first question or comment came from Lorene Hurley. Actually, there's a couple of comments from Lorene. And this was in response to your presentations, Phil, your presentation. The use of the term cheat sheet seems to play in the legitimization of sort of the cheating sites. And I guess the other comment she's made there is also about, and I'm assuming these are academic integrity values, and whether they should be stated explicitly in our graduate attributes. So I don't know, Phil or Anne, either of you want to comment on either of those two insights?
Yeah, I'll jump in on the cheat sheet thing. I think, yeah, we do want to be careful with our use of the word cheat. I've always thought cheat sheet was really a weird phrase. You know, we just want students to use notes. If it's a cheat sheet for an open book exam, just call it notes. As far as the values go, yeah, I think we should look at, we don't want proliferation of graduate attributes or whatever, because we've already got a zillion of those at every uni, but we should look and see if those map to what we have at our institution, and if not, well, why not? We might want to look at amending them.
I will agree. I actually, people who are at my university, anytime someone uses the word cheat sheet, I immediately jump on it and say, please don't legitimize it, because it drives me absolutely crazy. But there's also a thing about, Phil just mentioned about open book exams, and a discussion came up at our academic senate the other day from a student who said, well, what do you mean by open book exams? And it was a really interesting comment, because what we understand to be open book exams, particularly in an online examination environment, is interpreted very differently by students. So open book to them is anything I can access, and that's where sites like Chegg are actually profiting. So I think too, not only around terminology around cheat sheets or legitimising that, and I remember there was also Monopoly advertised, I think a couple of years ago, a cheaters edition, and I thought, you're making cheating a game and making it, it was another attempt to legitimise it. But we have to be careful how we phrase things, but also how we explain things to students. So we can certainly influence those areas.
Thanks for that, Anne. Christine Merlino asked, how many institutions block contract cheating sites at the institutional level? And there was quite a bit of discussion actually about this going through, about how effective this actually is.
I know our institution does on campus, but as pointed out in the chat, it only works while people are on campus, and with remote delivery, particularly last year, the ability to actually block that was compromised. I am aware that there is a list of sites that's shared between various IT areas of various universities, but how many actually institute that, I am not totally aware.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few that do. There's a desire in the legislation to do so at a national level, and I think that'll be really interesting how that's sort of implemented and what it means for researchers as well. But again, I'll just reiterate something I said. We need to not just have a block, because a block's something I get around, but some education and some referral is going to maybe change my behaviour.
And that, I guess, following on from that, when you did bring up the legislation, and Eric asked a question about what's your view on the Australian government law against contract cheating, and will it reduce or curtail contract cheating? I think we've touched on that quite a bit, but if any additional commentary?
Yeah, when the law was being discussed a couple of years back and formulated, I was pretty publicly anti a lot of it. A lot of the problems that I had with it were addressed. You know, it's hopefully not going to go after individual students. However, I do know that some recent media reporting said that there's a potential to go after students who are working for these contract cheating companies. I guess there's been similar legislation in operation in a lot of other jurisdictions. The most numerous would be different states in the US, and there's, in my view, not really evidence that it's worked. However, we could have a different experience here in Australia. But when we went out and kind of looked for offers of contract cheating online, this is a study that was led by Alexander Abboud. When he put up a tweet, most of the offers to do contract cheating came from places where doing so was illegal. And yeah, we kind of expected the opposite.
Thanks for that. And forgive the pronunciation name, Sangu, asked, any comment on text masking software to avoid Turnitin detection?
It comes back to that thing is, it's so frustrating that students spend so much of their time trying to mask stuff instead of writing the assignment. I find that particularly frustrating, which is why in the classes I've taught, I actually have a very open discussion about it and say that if you're going to, like, you've paid money for a subject, why not try and learn something while you're here? And I want to set you up so that when you go into a workplace and the boss asks you a question, that you can actually do what you paid to study to do. Those things exist. People will try and cheat the system. And some people use it as a game. They think it's a challenge, and yeah, I've got one over on someone for doing it. But at the end of the day, you've paid for some education. I don't want to give that away. I worked hard for my degrees, and I really encourage students to work hard for theirs, because that's what's going to get them through in the long run. The piece of paper might get you the job, but it doesn't mean you're going to keep it. That's going to be from what you've learned, and that ties into all our institutions are facing in Australia the legislation with the job-ready graduates. That this thing about accountability of what we're teaching students and preparing students for going out into the workplace is becoming more important. So we have to weave that narrative through what we teach and how we teach.
Thanks for that, Anne. Sorry, my mic cut out there for a second. And the last question comes from Richard Hewison. And Richard, I'm actually going to turn it over, see if you want to ask this verbally, about, with Australia's international borders closed, there's an urgency in the higher ed sector around maintaining enrollments by new and existing offshore students, at least until the borders reopen. It is possible that students may enroll offline and never participate in live sessions. So the question arises around authenticating student IDs. What pressure does this place on AI detection? there's quite a bit there. I don't know, Richard, do you want to comment and unpack that for us a little bit?
I can do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I coming through? Yes,
Yep,
good.
you sound great.
All right, terrific. Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's just obviously we're well, various places are locked down, obviously in Australia, and international students can't get in. I do teach mainly international students, so I have some who are already on shore before the pandemic, and some who are beaming in via Zoom, etc. And so I get to know them because of declining numbers. Unfortunately, they're a smallish group, and you do get a sense of where they're coming from. But students who potentially could sign up for an online course, and they have to meet the the learning outcomes through the assessments, and that's all done at a distance, at arm's length, because they're not actually coming into it. There's not a live component for whatever reason. They can't come in through Zoom. So we don't actually get to know the student as we would do in the classroom, or even to a degree on Zoom. We just have their work, and depending on the amount of work, the nature of work, what process needs to be in place, we know who we are and who's actually doing the work. And if we then have a problem, where do we start with that?
So I think we've had this for hundreds of years in the correspondence course space, and then in the online learning space. So probably, first thing would be to look at those institutions that have been online for decades, because they've had to deal with this for a long time. And I'd say to an extent, sometimes it's just been kind of ignored. We do need to have some identity verification throughout it. Some institutions are doing this during the pandemic through a verified ID that might be a government ID or a university ID that's then checked against the student's face. And to be honest, that's probably more robust than a lot of the ad hoc, oh, we know everyone who's in our classes sort of approach, because there's a fair bit of impersonation in face-to-face education as well. But yeah, so I guess I'd say it's a problem we've had for ages. We've dealt with it well in some contexts, and there are some existing approaches, but we do need to do better.
If I can just jump in again,
Yeah, go.
Just sheerly what I'm talking about here is really the volume. I understand the problem. I've dealt with correspondence. I've been in universities for a long time, but the sheer volume and some of the skills required, it was an earlier comment I make, that people actually need, and in some cases with workloads and people being time poor, it can be very difficult to pick up these more complex cases without more assistance. And it's just the offline component just adds to that pressure.
I think. Oh, go, Phil.
You go, Anne, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is where I know some of the things that we've been trying to do with learning analytics to highlight cases so that we can prioritise interventions, and contact can come into play. But there is no one perfect solution, and the resource issue faced in the sector, I think, is only compounding that, and I don't see any quick fix. But it's about trying to get some patterns in contact and making the most of those interactions when we have the opportunity. But it will continue to be an ongoing challenge.
Thank you for thank you for that, Anne and Phil. Before we wrap up, I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck Woody from Turnitin to just say a couple of words, and then we'll finish up.
All right, perfect. Thanks everyone for coming on this call today. Big thanks to Associate Professor Anne Rogerson and Professor Phil Dawson for a very insightful conversation, especially on your presentations. I know the chat has been blowing up since we started, so that's a really good sign that people are fully engaged. From us at Turnitin, we are part of the solution. We want to work, continue to collaborate with experts to see how we can align our products to support what we do as assessment experts. So I'd like to say you to Askalite for giving us this opportunity to collaborate, and thank you again to Phil and Anne for coming on the call today. Hope everyone stays safe, especially Melbourne, and you're in around the world. Please stay safe as we continue to navigate the COVID-19 crisis. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chuck, and thank you to all of you who attended today's webinar. Just as an FYI, our next Askalite Live webinar will be 10 to 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 15th of June, and will feature one of our Innovation Award winners from Massey University. So if you have interest in language learning, please join us for that. And thank you very much, and have a great couple of weeks.